David Langston stood at the pinnacle of success. A self-made CEO of a thriving tech conglomerate, his reputation as a visionary leader was unmatched. He'd built his empire from the ground up, earning the respect of his peers and the envy of competitors. His personal life seemed just as flawless. Married to the elegant and charismatic Elena, with 2 teenage children who idolized him, David embodied the image of a man who had it all. But even the strongest facades can hide the deepest cracks. It was during their 20th anniversary celebration that David first noticed something amiss. The event, a lavish affair at their sprawling coastal estate, had been meticulously planned by Elena. The guest list featured an elite mix of family, friends, and business associates. As champagne flowed and laughter echoed through the evening air, David observed Elena from across the room. She was radiant, as always, dressed in a sleek emerald gown that accentuated her poise and beauty. But her laughter seemed different, forced. He couldn't pinpoint why, but something gnawed at him. She had always been a social butterfly, effortlessly charming everyone in her orbit, yet tonight her attention seemed oddly concentrated on a particular guest, Ryan Bennett, David's longtime business partner and trusted confidant. The two shared hushed conversations and fleeting glances that sparked a faint unease within him. "David, you're zoning out." His sister Claire nudged him playfully. "Big night, huh?" He forced a smile. "Just soaking it all in." Claire tilted her head, studying him. "You sure? You look like you've seen a ghost." He brushed off her comment, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Later that evening, as the party dwindled and guests began to leave, David found himself alone in his office. The room was a testament to his achievements. Awards, framed photographs with dignitaries, and the latest tech gadgets adorned the walls. He sipped his bourbon, replaying moments from the night. Elena's subtle avoidance when he tried to engage her in conversation. Ryan's overly casual demeanor. Even Claire's offhand remark seemed to carry weight now. "Am I imagining things?" he muttered, running a hand through his silver-streaked hair. Just then, Elena entered, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood floor. She carried the air of someone who had just pulled off a flawless performance. "There you are," she said, her tone light. "Hiding away already?" "Just needed a moment to myself," David replied, studying her closely. She crossed the room and perched on the edge of his desk, her eyes sparkling. "The party was a success, don't you think?" "It was perfect. You outdid yourself, as always." Her smile wavered for the briefest second. "Well, it was for us. 20 years is worth celebrating." David nodded, but didn't respond. The silence stretched between them until she stood abruptly, smoothing her dress. "I'm going to check on the kids and head to bed," she said. "Don't stay up too late." As she left, David's gaze lingered on her retreating figure. For the first time in years, he felt a faint but undeniable sense of distance between them. The next day, David tried to shake off his suspicions. He immersed himself in meetings and strategizing for an upcoming product launch. Yet, the unease persisted, gnawing at the edges of his focus. During lunch, he received a call from Claire. "David, I don't want to pry, but is everything okay with you and Elena?" He froze. "Why do you ask?" "She seemed different last night, and I couldn't help noticing how much time she spent with Ryan." Eddie's grip tightened on his phone. It's nothing. They've always gotten along." "Maybe," Claire said, her tone laced with doubt. "Just keep your eyes open, okay?" The call left him restless. That evening, as he arrived home, he noticed Elena's car missing from the driveway. She had mentioned taking up fishing recently, claiming it helped her connect with nature. It was an unusual hobby for her, but he hadn't questioned it until now. Feeling a mix of curiosity and apprehension, David checked the location sharing app on her phone. A small dot blinked on the map, situated far from any known fishing spots. It was out at sea. "Fishing my ass," he muttered under his breath. Grabbing his binoculars, he headed to the cliffside overlooking the ocean. Scanning the horizon, he spotted a small boat drifting lazily in the distance. Even at this range, he could make out two figures aboard, Elena and Ryan. They were laughing, their heads close as they shared what appeared to be an intimate conversation. David's chest tightened. The sight was surreal, a stark contrast to the image of his perfect life. For years, he had prided himself on his ability to read people, to anticipate moves before they were made. Yet here he was, blindsided by the two people he trusted most. He lowered the binoculars, his hands trembling. The unraveling had begun, and David Langston was about to discover just how deep the betrayal ran. David Langston couldn't sleep that night. The image of Elena and Ryan on the boat played over and over in his mind, like a taunting echo he couldn't escape. He lay in the darkened expanse of their master bedroom, the once comforting silence now suffocating. Elena had returned home hours later, cheerful and casual, humming softly as she put her fishing gear away. But her effortlessness only deepened David's unease. The next morning, David rose early, driven by a need for clarity. He prided himself on precision and control. He was a man who thrived on certainty. Yet now he was navigating a labyrinth of doubt. His analytical instincts kicked in as he began piecing together a puzzle he hadn't realized existed. He started with her recent behaviors. Fishing was the most glaring anomaly. For the past 3 months, Elena had become passionate about it, seemingly overnight. She claimed it was meditative, a break from the pressures of their social obligations. Yet, David realized now that she never brought home any fish, nor did she share stories of her time on the water. Then there was Ryan. Over the years, he and Ryan had built not just a business, but a camaraderie born of countless late nights and shared triumphs. David trusted Ryan implicitly, even allowing him access to critical aspects of their operations. But now, the partnership felt tainted. How long had this been going on? Was it just personal, or had it spilled into their professional domain? David's suspicions grew as he began tracing connections between Elena's sudden absences and Ryan's conveniently timed meetings. A pattern emerged, one he couldn't ignore. He decided to test the waters. At breakfast, Elena seemed her usual self, chatting about their children's school projects and upcoming charity events. David listened, offering the occasional nod or question, all while carefully observing her. "You've been spending a lot of time fishing lately," he said, his tone deliberately neutral. "Maybe I should join you sometime. It might be good for me to unwind." Elena paused mid-sip of her coffee. For a fraction of a second, her expression shifted. Was it panic? Annoyance? Before she recovered, "I don't think you'd enjoy it," she said with a laugh. "You're not exactly the outdoorsy type, David." He smiled thinly. Maybe not, but it sounds like you're having such a great time. I'd hate to miss out." She waved a hand dismissively. "It's really nothing special. Just me, the water, and my thoughts. You'd be bored to tears." David didn't press further, but her response confirmed his fears. At the office, David called his assistant Clara into his private meeting room. Clara had been with him for nearly a decade and was fiercely loyal. He trusted her discretion. "I need you to dig into something for me," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Quietly." Clara nodded. "Of course. What's the issue?" "I want to know where Ryan has been during the last 3 months. Specifically, I want to cross-reference his schedule with Elena's absences. Use any means necessary. Expense reports, phone records, whatever you can access, but keep this between us." Clara's brow furrowed slightly, but she didn't question him. "I'll get on it right away." As the days passed, David threw himself into his work, a strategy that had always grounded him. Yet, the gnawing suspicion lingered, growing sharper with every moment Elena and Ryan spent apart from him. He began noticing subtle shifts in Ryan's behavior, too. His once easygoing demeanor now seemed overly casual, almost performative. One evening, David arrived home earlier than usual. The house was quiet, save for the faint hum of voices from Elena's study. Curious, he approached the door, careful not to make a sound. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up," Elena's voice said, low but tense. "You don't have to worry," Ryan replied. "He's too focused on the business to notice anything. Just stick to the plan." David's pulse quickened. He stepped back silently, retreating to his office before they could catch him listening. The confirmation hit him like a freight train. They were plotting something far more sinister than a mere affair. The next morning, Clara delivered her findings. "It's worse than I thought," she said, handing him a folder. Inside were documents linking Ryan to a series of unauthorized transactions, siphoning funds from their company's accounts. The amounts were staggeringly large, funneled into shell corporations tied to Elena's name. David's breath caught. This wasn't just a betrayal of his marriage or friendship. It was a calculated attack on everything he had built. "Did anyone else know about this?" he asked, his voice steely. Clara shook her head. "Not as far as I can tell. It looks like they've been covering their tracks carefully. But there's one more thing." "Huh." She hesitated before continuing. "I pulled some surveillance footage from our office building. Ryan has been meeting with investors behind your back, people we've actively been negotiating with." David clenched his fists. The audacity of their scheme was staggering. They were not just taking his money. They were trying to dismantle his empire piece by piece. That evening, David confronted Elena. "Where were you this afternoon?" he asked as they sat down for dinner. She glanced up, startled. "Fishing, of course. Why? And Ryan? Was he fishing too?" Her fork clattered against her plate. What are you talking about?" David leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "I'm done playing games, Elena. I know about the shell companies. I know about the meetings, and I know about you and Ryan." Her face paled. For a moment she seemed on the verge of denial, but then something in her shifted. Her shoulders straightened and her expression hardened. You don't understand," she said quietly. "Then help me understand," David said, his voice calm despite the storm raging inside him. Elena hesitated before speaking, her words measured. "You've always been so consumed with work, with your success. You left nothing for us, for me. Ryan saw that. He made me feel seen. And the money, the sabotage, was that for your feelings too?" Her eyes flashed with anger. "You have no idea what it's like to live in your shadow, David. Always second place, always just your wife. This was my chance to have something for myself." David sat back stunned. Her words cut deeper than he expected, but they also crystallized his resolve. "You made your choice," he said finally. "Now I'll make mine." The pieces were in place. David wasn't just a man betrayed. He was a strategist. And now it was time to play his hand. By the end of the week, David's plan was underway. He initiated a forensic audit of the company, ensuring every trace of Ryan and Elena's involvement was documented. Simultaneously, he began maneuvering their investors, reasserting his control and exposing Ryan's underhanded deals. But the final blow came during a board meeting where David presented irrefutable evidence of Ryan's embezzlement. The board voted unanimously to remove Ryan, who left the room pale and trembling. As for Elena, David didn't confront her again. Instead, he filed for divorce quietly, ensuring the courts had access to the financial evidence tying her to the fraud. She would face her reckoning in due time. David stood on the balcony of his office that night, gazing at the city skyline. His life was far from perfect now, but it was his again. The betrayal had scarred him, but it also sharpened his focus, and though justice had been served, he couldn't shake the lingering sense that the game wasn't over. Not yet. David Langston had always been a man of action, but betrayal required something deeper, a blend of patience, precision, and relentless determination. By the time the dust settled on Ryan's removal and the divorce filings, David had shifted from a state of reaction to one of meticulous planning. This wasn't just about reclaiming what he'd lost. It was about ensuring no one would ever dare cross him again. The first phase of his plan involved consolidating his power within his company. Ryan's absence had left a void, but rather than promote anyone to the vacated position, David used the opportunity to restructure the leadership hierarchy. He called an emergency meeting with his senior executives, laying out a vision that left no room for doubt about his authority. "We've been through a storm," David began, his voice steady and commanding. "But storms reveal the strength of a ship, and ours is unshakable. Moving forward, I expect nothing less than loyalty, transparency, and excellence. Anyone who feels they can't meet those standards is welcome to step aside." The room was silent, save for the rustle of papers as the executives nodded. David continued, "I'll also be conducting a thorough audit of all departments. This isn't about distrust. It's about ensuring we're all aligned and operating at our best. If anyone has concerns, now is the time to voice them." The tension in the room was palpable, but no one spoke. David's reputation as a fair but ruthless leader ensured compliance. Behind the scenes, David worked closely with Clara, his trusted assistant, to uncover every last thread of Ryan and Elena's schemes. The shell companies were only the tip of the iceberg. Ryan had been quietly selling trade secrets to competitors, while Elena had used her social connections to sway key investors against David's leadership. "This goes deeper than we thought," Clara said one afternoon, handing him another folder of findings. David scanned the documents, his jaw tightening. They weren't just trying to take my company. They wanted to destroy me completely. Clara hesitated before adding, "There's more. I found evidence that Ryan and Elena were in contact with some of our overseas partners. They've been spreading rumors about financial instability to undermine our credibility." David set the folder down, his mind racing. This wasn't just betrayal. It was an outright assault. But where others might have crumbled under the weight of such treachery, David saw opportunity. The next step was damage control. David began reaching out personally to the investors and partners Ryan and Elena had targeted. His approach was calm but assertive, emphasizing his commitment to the company's success while subtly planting seeds of doubt about Ryan's integrity. "I understand you've heard some troubling rumors," he told one investor during a late-night call. "Let me assure you, our financials are stronger than ever. In fact, I'd like to invite you to a private briefing to review our upcoming projects. I think you'll find them very reassuring." The investor hesitated before replying, "That's good to hear, David. I'll admit I had my doubts after speaking with Ryan, but your transparency means a lot." David smiled grimly. "Thank you. I'll make sure you have all the information you need to feel confident moving forward." One by one, David won back the trust of his allies. But his work didn't stop there. He began leveraging his connections to quietly discredit Ryan and Elena within their social and professional circles. It wasn't enough to remove them from his life. He wanted to ensure they couldn't find a foothold anywhere else. Ryan was the first to feel the impact. After being ousted from the company, he struggled to secure another position. David's quiet warnings to industry leaders ensured that no one was willing to take the risk of associating with him. Elena, meanwhile, faced her own reckoning. The divorce proceedings were swift but brutal. David's legal team uncovered every financial misstep she'd made, from siphoning funds to questionable investments. By the time the settlement was finalized, she was left with little more than the clothes on her back. Despite the satisfaction of watching their downfall, David found himself wrestling with unexpected emotions. Late at night, as he sat in the quiet of his office, he couldn't help but reflect on the years he'd spent building relationships with the very people who had betrayed him. "How did I miss it?" he asked Clara one evening as they reviewed yet another stack of documents. Clara paused, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes the people closest to us are the hardest to see clearly. You trusted them because they were part of your inner circle. That's not a weakness, it's human nature." David nodded but remained unconvinced. Trust had been his greatest asset in building his empire, but now it felt like a liability. As weeks turned into months, David's focus shifted from retaliation to rebuilding. He poured his energy into a new project, a cutting-edge artificial intelligence platform designed to revolutionize the tech industry. The project became his sanctuary, a reminder that his vision and determination were unshaken despite the chaos. During a launch event for the AI platform, David stood before an audience of investors, media, and tech enthusiasts. The energy in the room was electric, a stark contrast to the uncertainty of months prior. "This platform represents the future," David said, his voice filled with conviction. "It's a testament to what we can achieve when we refuse to let setbacks define us. Challenges will always come, but it's how we rise that truly matters." The applause that followed was thunderous, but David's satisfaction was tempered by a lingering sense of unease. He had reclaimed his company, dismantled Ryan and Elena's schemes, and launched a groundbreaking product. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was still lurking in the shadows. His instincts proved correct. One evening, as David reviewed the final financial reports from the AI launch, Clara entered his office, her expression grave. "We have a problem," she said, handing him a tablet. David's eyes scanned the screen, his chest tightening as he read the email thread. It was from an anonymous source, detailing a data breach tied to the AI platform. The breach appeared to have originated from someone within the company. "It's sabotage," Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. David's mind raced. Who could have orchestrated this? Ryan and Elena were out of the picture, but their betrayal had taught him a painful lesson. Trust was a fragile thing. "Track the source," he ordered, his voice steely. "I want to know exactly who's behind this." As Clara left to begin her investigation, David leaned back in his chair, the weight of the betrayal pressing down on him once again. He had fought so hard to reclaim control, but now it seemed the web of deceit was far more intricate than he had imagined. This time, however, he was ready. He wasn't the man who had been blindsided months ago. He was sharper, more cautious, and more determined than ever. David Langston didn't just survive betrayal, he thrived on the challenge it presented. And whoever was behind this new attack would soon learn that crossing him came at a price. David Langston stared at the glowing screen in his office, the details of the breach playing over and over in his mind. He had weathered months of betrayal and clawed his way back to control, only to face a new and insidious threat. This wasn't merely a professional challenge. It felt deeply personal, as though someone had been watching, waiting to strike at his most vulnerable moment. But David was no stranger to adversity. If this was another game, he would play it better than anyone else. The first step was containment. David convened an emergency meeting with his top cybersecurity experts the following morning. The room buzzed with tension as charts and reports were displayed on the monitors, each one more alarming than the last. The breach targeted proprietary algorithms within the AI platform, explained Mark, the head of cybersecurity. It's sophisticated. Whoever did this had inside knowledge of our systems. David's jaw tightened. Inside knowledge? Are you saying this was an inside job? Mark hesitated. It's possible the patterns suggest someone with access to high-level data, but there's no clear evidence yet. Then find the evidence, David snapped, and lock down everything. I want every system reviewed, every employee's activities scrutinized. I don't care how long it takes, just get it done. As the team dispersed, David's mind raced. If this breach originated internally, it meant someone on his staff was working against him. The thought was infuriating, but not surprising. He had learned the hard way that trust was a fragile commodity. Over the next few days, Clara worked tirelessly alongside Mark to sift through mountains of data. Meanwhile, David began his own investigation, relying on his instincts and years of experience reading people. He conducted one-on-one meetings with key employees, framing them as routine check-ins to gauge morale. Most of the conversations were uneventful. Nervous employees reassured him of their loyalty and expressed shock at the breach. But one meeting stood out. Sophia Guine, a senior developer who had been with the company for years, seemed unusually tense during their conversation. She fidgeted with her pen, avoided direct eye contact, and gave vague answers to his questions. "You've been a valuable part of this team, Sophia," David said, watching her closely. "I trust you understand how critical this situation is." "Of course," she replied, her voice unsteady. "I'd never do anything to jeopardize the company." Her words were right, but her demeanor was all wrong. David made a mental note to have Clara dig deeper into Sophia's background and recent activities. That evening, David returned home to find an unmarked envelope waiting on his desk. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed in a plain font. "You're looking in the wrong direction. The real enemy is closer than you think." David's blood ran cold. The message was unsettling, not just for its contents, but for the fact that it had been delivered directly to his home. Whoever had written it knew far more about his life than he was comfortable with. He immediately called Clara, sharing the contents of the letter. "This changes everything," she said, her voice sharp with urgency. "If they're willing to make it personal, we need to tighten security, both at the company and for you personally." "I agree," David said. "But this note also gives us something we didn't have before, a lead. Find out how it got here and who sent it." Over the next week, the investigation intensified. Clara uncovered discrepancies in Sophia's financial records, revealing large, unexplained deposits into her account. Meanwhile, Mark's team traced the source of the breach to a secure server that had been accessed using Ryan Bennett's old credentials. "Ryan's been out of the company for months," David said, frowning as he reviewed the report. "How is this possible?" Mark shrugged. Either someone else had access to his credentials or Ryan never truly left. The possibility hung in the air like a storm cloud. David had ensured Ryan's removal from the company, but he hadn't kept tabs on him afterward. Had Ryan found a way to infiltrate the business again, or was someone else using his name to cover their tracks? As David pondered his next move, Clara arrived with another development. The unmarked envelope had been traced to a courier service, but the sender had used a fake name and paid in cash. However, surveillance footage showed the package being dropped off by someone wearing a hoodie and sunglasses. "It's not much, but it's a start," Clara said. David studied the grainy image, his frustration mounting. "Whoever this is, they've planned every move. They're trying to rattle me." "It's working," Clara admitted. "But that could be their mistake. If they're overconfident, they'll slip up." David nodded. "Then we need to set a trap." The trap was simple but effective. David instructed Mark to plant false data within the company's servers, information about a non-existent project that would appear valuable to anyone monitoring their systems. At the same time, Clara worked to track who accessed the files. Within 48 hours, they had their answer. Sophia had downloaded the fake data, and her activity logs showed she had forwarded it to an external email address. When Clara traced the address, it led to a shell account linked to Ryan Bennett. David's hands clenched into fists as he stared at the evidence. It was all coming full circle. Ryan had never stopped his assault on David's life and legacy. He had simply shifted tactics, enlisting new allies to continue the fight. The confrontation with Sophia was swift and brutal. David called her into his office, flanked by Clara and Mark. "We know everything," David said, sliding the evidence across the desk. "Your financial records, your activity logs, your connection to Ryan, you're finished." Sophia's face crumbled. I didn't have a choice," she stammered. "Ryan threatened me. He said he'd ruin my career if I didn't help him." David's gaze was icy. "And you thought betraying me would save you? You've only made things worse for yourself." Sophia broke down, confessing everything. Ryan had approached her months ago, offering money and protection in exchange for inside information. When the data breach plan had been set in motion, he'd used her to execute it, promising it would be untraceable. "What does he want?" David asked, his voice low. "To destroy you," Sophia admitted. "He blames you for everything, for his career, his reputation, his life falling apart. He said you took everything from him, and now he wants to take everything from you." David wasted no time. Using the information Sophia provided, he orchestrated a coordinated strike against Ryan. Legal action was initiated, and private investigators were hired to expose Ryan's activities. Every connection, every deal, every scheme was brought to light. Within weeks, Ryan found himself facing criminal charges and financial ruin. His allies abandoned him, and his name became synonymous with deceit and failure. But David wasn't satisfied. He knew Ryan's downfall was only part of the battle. The person who had sent the note, the shadow player behind the scenes, remained at large. As David stood in his office late one evening, staring at the city lights, he felt a mix of triumph and unease. He had won this round, but the game wasn't over. Somewhere out there, another threat was waiting, and David Langston would be ready when it came. David Langston was no stranger to winning battles, but war was another matter. Though Ryan Bennett was facing ruin, David knew the man was merely a symptom of the disease that had infected his life. Someone else had orchestrated the chaos, and that unknown player was still out there. The note had been a clear warning, a sinister whisper that this wasn't over. As David sat in his office late one evening reviewing the latest updates from his investigators, his phone buzzed with a message. It was from Clara. "We've traced another lead. I need to see you immediately." Minutes later, Clara arrived at the office, her face pale but determined. She handed him a folder marked urgent. Inside were photographs, financial records, and correspondence tying an unexpected figure to the betrayal. The name at the top of the file made David's blood run cold. Claire Langston, his sister. David leaned back in his chair, stunned. Claire had always been a part of his inner circle, a confidant and advisor who had supported him through every challenge. The thought of her betrayal felt like a dagger to the heart. "What is this?" he asked Clara, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want to believe it either," Clara said, her tone somber. "But the evidence is clear. Claire has been funneling information to Ryan for months. She's also been receiving payments from one of the shell companies connected to Elena." Davy's hands clenched into fists. Why? What could she possibly gain from this?" Clara hesitated. "It seems personal. She's been telling people that you've taken everything from her, that she's lived her entire life in your shadow." The words hit him like a physical blow. Claire, who had always been fiercely independent, had harbored resentment for years. He had been so focused on his own success that he had missed the bitterness brewing right under his nose. The next morning, David invited Claire to his estate under the guise of a family discussion. He needed answers, but more importantly, he needed to see the truth in her eyes. She arrived, her demeanor as composed as ever, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit. They sat in the sunlit dining room, the air between them heavy with unspoken tension. "Thank you for coming," David began, keeping his tone neutral. "Of course," Claire replied smoothly. "You sounded serious. What's going on?" David studied her for a moment before sliding the folder across the table. "I think you know." Claire hesitated before opening it. As her eyes scanned the contents, her expression flickered: shock, then anger, and finally, resignation. "You had me investigated?" she asked, her voice low but sharp. "You've left me no choice," David replied. "You've been working with Ryan, with Elena. Why, Claire? What could you possibly hope to gain?" Her lips curled into a bitter smile. "Gain? That's rich coming from you. You've always had everything, David. The success, the admiration, the power. Meanwhile, I've been relegated to the sidelines, your dutiful little sister who never quite measured up." David's voice hardened. "That's nonsense. You've always been an integral part of my life, my business. If you felt overlooked, you should have come to me, not stabbed me in the back." "Come to you? Oh." Claire's voice rose, the bitterness spilling out. "You don't listen, David. You never have. It's always about you, your vision, your empire. Do you even realize how many sacrifices I've made for you? How many times I've cleaned up your messes without so much as a thank you?" David's anger flared, but he forced himself to stay calm. "If you felt undervalued, we could have fixed that. But you didn't just betray me, you tried to destroy me. And for what? Revenge?" Claire's expression softened slightly, a flicker of regret crossing her face. You wasn't supposed to go this far. Ryan convinced me it was just about evening the playing field, taking back what I deserved. But then things spiraled and I didn't know how to stop." David's jaw tightened. "And the note? Was that you?" Claire shook her head. "No, that wasn't me." Her denial left him unsettled. If Claire wasn't the shadow player behind the note, then who was? Despite her confession, David refused to let his guard down. He instructed Clara to handle the legal proceedings, ensuring Claire's involvement was documented but kept out of the public eye. For now. He wasn't ready to destroy his sister completely, but he also couldn't trust her. With Ryan and Elena neutralized and Claire's betrayal exposed, David hoped for some semblance of closure, yet the unease lingered. The note's ominous warning remained unanswered, and David couldn't shake the feeling that another storm was brewing. Weeks later, as David prepared for a critical investor presentation, Clara burst into his office, her face pale with urgency. "We found something else," she said, handing him another folder. Inside was a single image, a grainy photo of an unfamiliar man sitting across from Ryan at a cafe. The timestamp was recent, taken after Ryan's removal from the company. "Who is this?" David asked, his brow furrowing. "We're not sure yet," Clara admitted. "But he's been linked to multiple shell corporations tied to the breach. It looks like Ryan wasn't working alone." David's stomach churned. Just when he thought he had untangled the web, another layer revealed itself. "This isn't over," he muttered. "No," Clara agreed, her voice grim. "It's just beginning." David Langston stood on the balcony of his office that night, staring at the city skyline. He had faced betrayal, unraveled conspiracies, and fought to protect everything he'd built. Yet, he couldn't escape the shadows that seemed to follow him at every turn. For a man who had always thrived on certainty, the unknown was his greatest enemy. But David wasn't afraid. If the game continued, he would rise to meet it, stronger, sharper, and more relentless than ever. As the wind whipped through the night, David made a silent vow. Whoever was left in the shadows would soon learn the price of crossing him, and this time, he wouldn't stop until every last enemy was exposed.